All right, this is just a really organic, natural conversation about how you can discover your Enneagram type if you don't know and if you want to know. So this is what I tell my clients or people that I'm meeting with when we're about to do an assessment, which narrows down the 27 possible Enneagram subtypes to at least 3 or so. So the first thing is, I always send them, and I'll include links that I reference in the description of this video, but I always send them a podcast to listen to before we do our assessment. So the podcast is, I believe, it's episode number 1 on the podcast called Enneagram 2.0. Episode 1 is about the Enneagram types. So there's 9 types. These are based on patterns in psychology and conditioning when it comes to the conditioning that a person takes on to make it in the world. There's 9 archetypal patterns that we see in humans. And so there's 9 types. So first you want to know, what type are you? And then from there, it's you want to think about what's the subtype? What's my subtype? And that's where it gets a little more complicated because there's 27 of them versus 9. So each 9 has 3 subcategories, and that's where we get the subtypes. But the important thing is when you're looking to find your type or subtype. But when you're looking to find the type, which of the 9 Enneagram types could I be? You want to base your own self-assessment on whether or not you identify with what's described as the passion of the type. You don't want to base your assessment on the external behavior of the type. You want to think more about what's the motivation behind the behavior. And this is what makes finding your type tricky sometimes, because the motivation behind is often part of our shadow or our blind spot. So we don't always know why we act the way we do or why we do what we do. We might feel ashamed, guilty, or bad about the motivation behind. And it might be just totally unconscious to us at the time when we listen to find out what our Enneagram type is. So here's my advice. When you listen to this podcast, or you're reading about the Enneagram types, or you talked with someone and you're curious, you first want to understand the passions. So the passion, there's one passion that's for each type. It's important to know that the passion is described in Old English language. So you want to make sure you really understand the whole meaning of the word when it comes to the passion of the type. So for example, if you learn about type 9 and you hear that their passion is sloth, and you think, well, I'm not a lazy person, so that can't be me. That's misunderstanding what the meaning of the word sloth is doing in this case. So when you hear about a 9, it's not talking about laziness in the typical sense of the word sloth. It's not about being like a lazy person. It's about going to sleep to an aspect of yourself that is important. And so you really, I guess what I'm saying is when you learn about the passions, you really need to make sure you understand what the word means when speaking about the type. Don't base it off of what you think automatically. Because these words are loaded with so much meaning and information, don't base it off of the word right away. Another good example is pride. Pride for type 2 is the passion for type 2. A lot of people would never say that they're proud or that they have pride. And that is because the word pride is describing much more than what we initially think of when we hear the word pride. It's not about I'm proud of myself and I think that I'm just great beyond words, and there's that kind of healthy pride too. Like everyone should be proud in some way, and yes, that's true. But this word pride, when it comes to 2s, is very specific about what it's describing. Okay, so that's one thing to think about when you're hearing the passions. make sure you really do understand the meaning of each of the type's passions before you say that one can't be me. So you have to, think about how it could really apply to you once you understand the word, the passion. And the passion is another way of saying kind of the ego's tendency to overdo something, or it's the unconscious motivation behind why we do what we do. So I'll give you an example for me, okay? And this is another thing you want to keep in mind when you're learning about the passions of the type. So for me, I am a type 4. My subtype is self-preservation 4. So just to let you know, for each type, there's a social, a sexual, and a self-preservation instinct that is going to determine what subtype you are. So I'm a self-pres 4. And just by the way, when I say sexual, it does not mean sex. It doesn't mean, what it means is one-on-one connection. So the sexual instinct in a human is not about going out and getting sex. It could be that, but that's not what this is describing in its entirety. Okay, so I'm a self-pres 4. I'm going to bring you back to the point I was going to make. When you're listening to a podcast or reading a book or learning about these Enneagram types, you have to pay attention to the passion and what it's really describing. And then you also want to keep this in mind. So this is where I'm going to use my story. I'm a self-preservation 4. The passion of 4 is envy. I would have never admitted or thought that envy was behind so much of what I did when I was in personality in a deep way. I'm still, working through a lot of things. But when I first learned about envy for a type 4, it was hard for me to understand how envy could really be behind so much, because envy was in my shadow. The passion sometimes is so unconscious that we don't recognize it. And that's where it can be tricky too, to find your type. You may not realize how much that passion is manifesting in your life. So that's why it's, again, tricky to find a type when you are blind to the unconscious behavior driven by the passion. So you have to keep an open mind when you're listening to the descriptions or reading about these types. You got to keep an open mind, because it's so common that people just don't see what's really driving them. That's why it's called the shadow. That's why it is a blind spot. It means you don't see it. So it's going to take some brutal honesty with yourself, some, a true desire to want to grow, and not making it about you're a bad person for having these behaviors. It's going to take a lot of bravery, courage, and curiosity, because you'll be hopefully thinking, okay, I want to learn why I'm doing the things I'm doing. I want to learn why the suffering is repeating itself in my life. What am I not seeing? And have curiosity about that. So that way, when you come up against an aspect of your ego that has been hidden for so long, you won't reject it or deny it or say, no, that can't possibly be me. You'll have an open mind because you do want to grow. That's what the Enneagram is meant for. It's meant for growth. It's meant for transformation. It's not meant to have a silly game by saying, oh, I'm a type 5 and that's just how I am. And I'm, it's just because I'm a 5. It's really meant for growth. So if you're using the Enneagram for growth, then you'll get what you're looking for out of it. If you're using it as a gimmick or like just a fun way to type yourself and your friends and your family and label people, it's not for you. It's not good for that. Don't use it that way. It's more powerful and it's more useful when you use it in a very intentional, conscious way for growth. All right, so that's my little, get off my little soapbox about that. So back on track. We're talking about the passions. I'm trying to remind myself. We're talking about the passions. If you don't spot them, it can be troubling. Another way to determine if you might be a type is, and I'll give you another example of my own, but it's if you feel that what you're learning about or hearing right now when you hear about this type is rubbing you the wrong way. If it feels gross, if it feels wrong, if it feels shameful, if it feels embarrassing, or if you notice you're rejecting it or reacting to it pretty quickly, that could mean, I'm not saying it is, but that could mean that it's your type. Not always. I just want to be clear. In some cases, though, when you find your type and you learn about the passion, and then when you learn about the subtype, which is even more specific, if these patterns have been unconscious for a while and there hasn't been a lot of work being done towards these things, it can feel very threatening to the ego through the conditioned patterns that as a child kept you safe. And so it feels bad to expose it. It feels uncomfortable. And so I'll put my example in here now. So when I first learned about the Enneagram, I only knew about the 9 types. Oops, that means it's the time changed on it. It's 12 o'clock over here now. So when I first learned about Enneagram, I only learned about the 9 types. I didn't know about the 27 subtypes yet. That's my next point, is why subtypes are super important for you to know about. Not just the 9 types, but you do have to talk to a coach or someone who knows that about the 27 types. All right, but I'm gonna get to that next. So I only knew about these 9 types. I took a test online. I read a book that only acknowledged the 9 types, and I believed I was a type 6 for a while, like less than a year. But for a while, I was walking around believing I was a type 6 because the test told me, the online test, and the books I was reading, I could relate to a lot of it. It made sense. I didn't have a coach. I didn't have a therapist. I didn't have a mentor at the time who was helping me weed through all these possibilities of types. I was just doing it on my own, which happens to be it was a ego behavior at the time. I got to do it on my own, right? So I learned about the type 6, and it wasn't so bad. I liked being a 6. I felt that it was a compliment to know I'm a 6. I like that. I like these characteristics. And clearly I didn't know that much about what I was doing. Then I learned about the 27 subtypes. I listened to a podcast, and I'll link the stuff down in the comments in the description. But I listened to actually an Audible book, and the book is called The Complete Enneagram. And as I listened to all the descriptions of all the 27 subtypes, I realized I am not a type 6. I am a self-preservation 4. Not only did I feel incredibly understood by hearing that description and realizing this is my subtype, I am not a 6, I also felt very uncomfortable. I felt like shit because I did not want to be a 4. I felt ashamed of it, embarrassed. I felt like it was not pleasant. And that's sometimes what happens. Not all the time, but it sometimes is what happens when you find your real subtype. The author of that book, Beatrice Chestnut, says, when you find your subtype, it will fit like a glove. All of the things that it's describing, you can kind of see it played out in your life. When you learn about this ego construct or this conditioned pattern. And when you learn about the shadow, it really hits close to home, and it may not be good. Because of what I explained earlier, it's exposing aspects of yourself that were kept in the unconscious for a reason. Because at a certain point in your life, for most of your life, as you were growing up, as you were developing this egoic pattern, it kept you safe, loved, seen, It's what you needed to do to get on in the world. So certain parts of you had to be expressed and put out in the world. This is who I am. This is what I'm about. And then certain parts of you, because of what you put in the front, naturally has to get put in the back. And what's put in the back is your shadow. And the Enneagram exposes the shadow. So it's going to bring it up to the front and put it in your face. And so if you're not ready for that kind of inner work, that depth of self-knowing and responsibility, really, then it can be just an unpleasant experience. So just want to keep that, I wanted to point that out. I want you to keep that in mind, that that is something to be aware of when you're listening or reading about, or whatever, learning about these Enneagram types. If you hit the right one, it could be unpleasant. And just know that's okay. That's very normal. It's not just me who's had that unpleasant experience. A lot of clients describe exactly that. It feels pretty bad. And I've had some people who have decided not to work with me at that point because I don't believe they were ready. And that's okay. It's okay if you're not ready. Just know that might be a sign. Okay, so next we're going to go into subtypes. So there's a huge problem if you're only learning about types and never going to learn or not learning about subtypes. The number one reason I think, and I don't know if everyone would agree with me on this, other teachers and coaches who use the Enneagram or therapists, but I think the number one reason to learn about subtypes is if you don't know about the 27 types, it's very likely you've mistyped yourself or someone's mistyped you. So like in that case, that example I gave you in my case, I thought I was a 6 because a self-preservation 4 can look like a 6. So it was really important for me to see that there are very common similarities, but the main difference was the passion of envy was much more of a factor than fear, which is the passion for 6. However, when I read about 4s, and I only read about type 4, not the subtypes, not social 4, not sexual 4, not self-preservation 4, I only knew the 9 types. When I read the description of 4, it did not match my experience. So that would happen a lot with certain subtypes of each type. There's some subtypes that just look like another type. So you really have to know the details and a little bit more about all 27 types to jump to a conclusion and say, I'm this type. I guess the reason for that, I'll explain another thing. Yeah. The reason why, oh shoot, I lost it. It'll come back. So forget that for now. But I did want to warn against using a test online to determine your type. It's not that taking a test is wrong. You can totally do it and see what you get, and it's fun. And it might generate ideas and get you thinking, and all that is so good. Just don't rely on an online test to determine what your subtype or type is. Don't rely on the test. The reason is it can't do the work of a human doing an assessment with you, asking you questions, asking you follow-up questions, reading the body language and the energy behind the words you say, the answers you give. An online test is a great supplemental tool, but it should not be the only one you rely on. And that's what I did, right? That's why I thought I was a 6, because I took a test and I was like, yeah, that makes sense. It made total sense. So that's why just don't rely on the test completely. You can do it for fun. So I do recommend meeting with someone who works with the Enneagram and knows how to perform a proper assessment on you by talking to you in a deep conversation. You'll talk about experiences, things. They have a bunch of questions prepared, and they're gonna ask you all these questions so that when you answer, they can ask follow-up questions to your answers and get more information and really just try to help you narrow down the possible subtypes that you could be. So I do offer free assessments, and I'll put my link in the description below if you want to do that. There was something else I wanted to say earlier, and I don't remember exactly what it was. So another really helpful resource when you're trying to determine your type is to listen to panels of people who are all one type. They might be different subtypes, but they're all one type. And to just see what their experience is like in comparison to your experience. It won't be exact, but it's really fascinating to hear how a panel of people who are type 1 speak and how they've experienced the world and what they think about, what they feel, how they express themselves, all of that, and how different it is compared to another type. So like if you're a 7 and you listen to a panel of 7s, you might feel like those are my people. I feel really at home. That's exactly how I feel. I feel understood. Like, whoa, that's crazy. Like all of them are sharing this kind of, in some way, this experience with me. So if you're a type 7, you'll really resonate with other type 7s when they speak about the things that have been hard for them, the challenges, the things they're working on, and how they look at the world. And that'll be really different than other types. So I do find that listening to panels is very helpful. And so I'll add that, that resource in the description below of basically it's a panel done by Beatrice Chestnut when she went and visited a school called can't remember the school's name anyways, but it's with a guy named Michael. And anyways, so she just spoke to a group of people who were one type, and then she did that for all 9 types. So you'll be able to explore that way too. If you think, oh, I can't tell if I'm a type 3 or a type 1, and I also relate a lot to type 7, you can listen to all 3 videos and just kind of see how you compare to their stories, to the panel's experience. So other thing, don't think that just because I think I'm this type, that it's true. So as you're learning about these different subtypes and types, or whatever point you're on, so I do recommend you try to find the type based off of the passion, and then look into the subtypes. But when you think you've landed on 1 or 2, take your time with it. So I always tell clients that it's like you're trying on an outfit, and you're kind of seeing what it feels like to think like a 6, let's say. So if I thought I was a 6, I want to learn about them first in a very objective way, and then start to apply that conditioning, that pattern to myself, to my experience, and kind of see, is this true? Did this play out for me in my life? And take like a week or couple weeks to just sort of turn it over. Don't feel like you have to decide on what type you are. There's no pressure, there's no rush. And honestly, that if you do feel rushed, that could lead you to make the wrong choice. And same with a coach or a therapist. If you have someone telling you what type you are and they've only met you once, or you've done a couple sessions, I would just be careful of that, because these things take time. Like I said, it's exposing an aspect of yourself that's been unconscious. And even if you've done inner work, there's still so much behind this passion, this blind spot, this shadow that is unseen to you. So don't expect that you'll be able to determine right away. For some people, they do, and that's so cool, and it's nice. But for most people, it takes time, and so don't feel like you have to choose, or like it's wrong if you don't know. That's normal. And also just be wary of any coach or therapist who tells you what you are, because they can't fully know your whole experience, especially if the work hasn't been very long between the two of you. And they shouldn't feel like they need to be right about your type. The message you should get from them is, I'm going to help you through the process of discovering your type, but I'm not going to fool myself and believe I know so much that I can tell you your type. To me, that's not a responsible way to use the Enneagram. It's a very delicate tool. It's very personal, and it shouldn't be forced on anyone, and no one should tell you what you are, and it shouldn't be used as a label. I'm trying to think if there's anything else, because I really want this video to be like complete and thorough. So let me just think a little bit, pause it. Okay, maybe this is getting a little complicated now, but there is also when you're learning about subtypes, keep in mind that there are people in your life who have been very influential to you. And sometimes there's something what's called an overlay. So if you feel, let's say you identify strongly with the social 1, but you also identify with social 6. I've done this with clients when there's 2 or 3 that really seem like it's hard for them to determine. It's hard for us to work through what type. There's a couple factors underneath this, and maybe I can give some advice here. So one factor is take a look into their parents, and they can help you with this information. You just ask and you talk about it, and it's gonna maybe take some time to sift through. But if they have a parent who might have been one of those subtypes, they might have what's called like a family overlay or a parent overlay, where the parent has just influenced so much of their personality that there's something called like an energy merge or a merging of some maybe beliefs that is making the person's subtype or personality structure unclear and a little blended with another person. So just keep that in mind. If that's you, or if you're working with a coach and there's some confusion about that, just keep that in mind, that there might be a parent who, like I know someone who probably has a 5 parent who is pretty influential, and this person seems like a 5, but this person is not a 5. And I don't want to get all detailed, but just keep that in mind. So there's that possibility of an overlay, and there's also the possibility of, pause, I need to remember what I was going to say. Yeah, lots of trauma in the past. So if a client has had a lot of trauma in the past, it may not benefit them. And if they haven't done work on it, that's another huge thing. If it's unhealed trauma, it may not benefit that client or the person or you to try to find out your type, because there might be too much of overlays going on and a lot of internal chaos to really know, to feel a sense of identity. So if there's been psychological trauma, emotional trauma, physical trauma, spiritual trauma, or all of those or some of those, and it's unhealed, consider not digging into your subtype yet, because it might just be really confusing, and it might be more important to prioritize the healing before you use the Enneagram completely. And I'm not saying it wouldn't help, because when I learned about the Enneagram, I would say I had a lot of unhealed trauma myself, and it helped me. It totally did. But I still had to do a lot of healing work on its own, like standalone healing work with people and with myself. So I guess what I'm saying is, when there's a lot of unhealed trauma, the Enneagram might bring up things that need to be healed, and you need to be prepared to heal them, because the Enneagram tool is that powerful and useful, but it also could just make your assessment more difficult. That's all I wanted to say about that. Okay, so I think that's it. If I happen to remember that last thing that I thought it would come back, but it hasn't, I'll just post it in the description below. But I hope that helped. And if you have any questions at all, I would love to do, an assessment with you. If you're open to it, it's a free assessment. Like I said, it's something I offer because I enjoy doing them. I feel that they really, really help people, and I give you a lot of follow-up material. So we'll do the whole session and then email resources back and forth and get a dialogue going about, what you think and how you feel about the results. And we go from there. It's not like I do that assessment for free, and I don't just leave you to figure it out on your own. I'm there to help you through the process if it's what you want. Okay, so that's it. I hope you have a great day, and I hope that your inner work continues and you're very satisfied with the things that the Enneagram uncovers in terms of it's going to help me grow. It may not be pleasant all the time, but at least it'll help me become conscious in a much bigger way. See ya.